and welcome back to the Digital Bodhisattva podcast, a place for conscious conversations at the confluence of technology and engaged spiritual practices. This conversation is a great one, and it was recorded on the Digital Bodhisattva Clubhouse with a number of wonderful guests. Our main speaker is Vienna Looi, who is a longtime friend of the international network of engaged Buddhists and something of an innovator in the space of Web3, cryptocurrency, and blockchain technologies. She is joined by other familiar voices in the Digital Bodhisattva Clubhouse, including Vidya, Topsy, Doreen, and myself, Dexter Bone. There were also a couple of Vienna's friends from the Kernel Fellowship Program, which is a collaborative online learning community that is designed to be a space for people interested in these new forms of distributed ledger technologies to come together and work together to build cool things in the world. So it's wonderful to have them involved in the conversation as well, providing their own unique perspectives. Some of the fascinating topics we got into today were Buddhist economics and unpacking some of the key principles that we find there, drawing on kind of the seminal work of E.F. Schumacher, specifically his essay, Buddhist Economics. So we unpacked that a little bit, as well as alternative ways of organizing groups and economic models that might be developed centered on values such as compassion and loving kindness, facilitated by technology such as blockchain and the host of opportunities that Web3 has to offer. So you'll learn more about Web3 and what that even means. We also discussed the ways in which Buddhist practice can become a praxis for direct engagement with social action and social organization. In fact, the conversation begins with a vivid recount of Vienna's experience in Malaysia while she was part of the Malaysian electoral reform movement, which was quite harrowing for her and significantly shaped her understanding of engaged Buddhism and continues to influence her work today. So without further ado, let's dive right into the conversation. Thanks for listening. All right. Well, welcome back to the Digital Bodhisattva Clubhouse. Today we have a very, I'm very excited for today's conversation. Vienna Looi, a longtime friend of INEB as well. So she's going to be talking about a Buddhist vision of crypto economics. So thank you for joining us, Vienna. I'm really excited to learn more about what you're up to.
Thank you, Dexter. And to answer a little origin story question that our friend here posed for me. So how it all happened is in Malaysia, which is where I met Vidya. I used to go to my local Buddhist temple, and I used to organize Buddhist youth camp there. And then at one point, I remember feeling like, why is it that our compassion seems like it ends at a temple door, like at the temple walls? I'm like, this doesn't make sense. Like if I were to kind of couple my meditation practice with how we are practicing in a temple. And that was like the beginning of my quest to like, wait, what is Buddhism that doesn't end at a temple wall? And I remember on the side, I was also trying to practice compassion in the streets as well. Like, because back then in Malaysia, we have a 60 plus year old regime that has been in power since independence. And even though we have elections, it was always electing the same government. So I was a part of this electoral reform movement that actually, incidentally, I got into because I came out of a meditation retreat and I was like, wow, if I really believe in what kind of insight I got out of the retreat, then I have to stand by that. And then there I was like seeing people getting arrested right before my eyes, weeks in advance before a protest, because they were suspected to be a protester for electoral reform. And I thought to myself that this is where I would put practice into practice. So, and this was before I even knew engaged Buddhism existed, because it was through my endeavors in the streets that I met Vidya, that he was leading a group of people in the electoral reform movement. And I was like, oh yeah, there are Buddhists out there who are engaged in social issues and social change. So that was the setting of how Vidya and I met, like on the streets, basically. And for me, what happened also is that that meditation retreat was actually the lead into how I would ended up participating in the movement more than just being a participant, because I ended up wanting to meditate in front of the paramilitary forces and the protesters. And we were shot at with a military grade tear gas in a tunnel. And even though exposure over a couple of minutes had killed like 33 Palestinians in the past, and so it was the same tear gas. And I actually thought that I wouldn't make it out of the tunnel. And it's interesting because I got to watch the transformation of like my suffering of like being not being able to breathe and having all this pain around my body and wishing like this pain would go away because I could not breathe, and every breath that I take is paining me more and burning me more. And eventually I was like, I'll do whatever it takes to take those suffering away. And that ended up being the question that took me out of just, oh, this is my suffering, and seeing that, oh, there's such a thing as structural suffering that got me to the tunnel that day. Like it's something, it's one thing to say that, it was the paramilitary force that like fired at us, and that it was the prime minister that ordered them to fire at us. But it's another thing to say like there is an entire incentive structure and like there's an entire web that we have designed that makes certain types of people come in power, and that it incentivizes that to become the way how our society works. And that is also what landed me there that day in those actions. So that's when, when I met Vidya and he was talking about structural suffering, like it clicked for me. I was like, yes, I remember seeing this, like thinking I was gonna die. And then I was thinking, well, what can I do if I did get out of this alive? I remember practicing metta and then like making a vow that if I made it out of here alive, that I would come back the next day. Not the next day, the next week, like every week. And so that was the beginning of like how I started this journey of trying to integrate like my life mission with the Dharma, and then looking into how like economic system is a part of all this. Like why do we have certain type of political and economic system? And yeah. I just want to briefly check in like, before I continue. Do y'all have any questions, or do you feel like you want me to dive into the next part of this around why crypto?
Please dive into the why crypto and where that took you, because I know that you kind of left Malaysia after that point. Maybe you could enter that chapter as well.
Right. So eventually, we were coordinating something like 300,000 people in the electoral reform movement. And at one point, when I was out in the US for this Buddhist Geeks conference, I heard news that my friends back home were a part of this crackdown and that they were arresting a large number of people who organized a bunch of gatherings in the past. And I was advised not to go back to Malaysia and continue working on the system that I was proposing because this was in 2013 when I wanted to have a free and fair election without a corrupted electoral commission. And I was proposing that we could use blockchain in this whole NGO circle of about 100 NGOs that was coordinating the 300,000 people. And yeah, and it was definitely like a journey of like realizing that I now also need to build the tools myself. And that, you know, when people got arrested and they were given prison sentence and charged with sedition, which some of them, like for every tweet that they were tweeting about how there was an independent judiciary system in Malaysia, they got like a sentence, and so like 13 tweets would amount to like a lifetime imprisonment. Yeah, so I was told like, yeah, it would be a better use of my time. I don't think that that describes it, but you know, that to stay in the US and start building those tools and systems. Yeah. So Dexter, I'm curious, like, you know, given that, like, would would we want to dive into how, like, maybe a show of hands, actually, I would love to hear, like, have y'all got to read like the things that Dexter started sharing?
Yeah, I shared them to as many people as I could. I'm not entirely sure how many people read them. It looks like Ted raised his hand, Theodore in our in the audience, and I know that Topsy and Doreen also had a look. But yeah, go ahead.
Right.
Vienna, I did look. I looked at the Medium article, and I have to confess some of it was over my head. So I also have two questions for you, and I see Ted's question too. One is, why did you suggest blockchain out of all things for the movement? And when you talked about you were suggested not to go back to Malaysia, were there any concerns about your safety? Is that part of the equation?
Yeah, yep, that was it. Because everyone was yeah, getting arrested, and there was a massive crackdown basically. And the aim was also because we were like eventually we would succeed, but it would take a couple of years. But in the meantime, a lot of people were charged. Oh, great! I just wanted to mention, like, I also have friends from the US joining here. So, Jasmine is someone from like the Kernel Web3 fellowship that I just wrapped up. And then I have Lawrence as well, and Tinyo and Theodore. Oh my gosh, I almost wish that we could just go for a round of intro, actually. Dexter, do you think I can do that right now? Or do you want me to continue with the origin story?
Let's do that after you dive into why blockchain, because
Okay.
that'll help introduce the whole
Sounds good. Why blockchain?
Web3 and the whole.
Okay, this is a way to be able to enable self-organization. I actually did hit a roadblock at one point organizing people. Like it just felt like in one moment I have like 100 people like messaging me about what to do, and I remember wondering like how can we get people to know, like, to have a goal and then self-organize themselves. And then at the same time, I also wanted like an electoral commission that, you know, it's like in Malaysia, basically, if you corrupt the electoral commission, you could basically win the elections that you want. And they did that for 60 years. And I was like, how can we not have that, but still be able to come up with a vote results without having this commission that can be easily corruptible? do you feel like that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. So back then, I remember we had an Occupy in Malaysia, and I will have to plug in that we actually had the first Occupy in the world before Occupy Wall Street. And I remember we were occupying the square, and at one point I was just like, how can this possibly be sustainable? We are really thought that, oh, we need to be able to design an economic system ourselves so that our movement is not just this kind of fight against the mainstream system, but that it has an ability to generate value on its own and an ability to, in a way, like make it better than the current system. So we don't have to just try to fight and tear down the current system without anything to replace. And then we will end up with like what happened with the revolutions in Arab. Yeah. So yeah, with this, I also like to like lead in a little to, for me, the crypto journey is also one that, I mean, there's so much content right now out there about crypto. And my intention for our group here is one that is focused on like a more value-centered way of looking at crypto. I think Kernel is one of those communities in the crypto and Web3 space that does that. And the reason why I talk about that is also, it's when we say crypto or blockchain and Web3, they all have like meaning in terms of like bringing the people together to coordinate and then move towards a certain kind of value-centered economy. These days, when we relate to the web, our experience is much more of a Web 2 experience where, you know, web, so like with Web 1, you have the very typical like more like like one to many type of interaction. With Web 2, you have something like Facebook, where you can actually interact, you know, with one another, have two-way feedback and some things like that. But the economic layer to Web 2 is not. It's not, you can't actually tap onto that. Like you say you're a YouTube creator, you never really actually get to say, hey, like, what if I believe in this? What if I value this instead? So with Web3, you have basically an ability, like if you have an Uber, you basically are part of the co-owners of the Uber. So imagine a cooperative. So that's one way to look at Web3 now. And so what that means is that it becomes more important to say what is it that we want to program in as a way to coordinate ourselves. And for me, one of the important point is using this moment of crisis, like how the current climate crisis can actually be looked at as like an existential crisis in a global scale, and also like when we learn from the Dharma, like there's also this existential crisis in a local scale. Like you're facing death as well, and it's important to, I think like this is where I also sometimes feel like, being in the U.S. now, sometimes we think about, oh yeah, right, like it's like the culture is actually really important, like because here I do feel that there's a bit more reluctance to look at the issue of like death or letting go, like, so because the financial system have created so much abundance that helps lubricate a lot of emotional issues you have and a lot of like existential crisis you could have had. And so I'm advocating for people here to look at, oh, right, existential crisis is basically the moment for the mother of innovation, and that if we were to be able to bring our practice together in this time, then we can actually create this synthesis of your practice, like helped by the Dharma, and also the tools that you're using and it's very powerful in a crypto economic sense, and bring them together in a way that helps to flow your research and activism. That's how I often see it. Like I try to turn my life into both a research and a practice ground. And yeah, I wanted to stop there for now to have a bit of a check-in and say, like, how does that land for you all? Any questions that you might have, a curiosity to get into?
Thank you, Vienna. That was really fascinating. And I also wanted to just point out, for as we are an engaged Buddhist kind of community, the way that you associated activism with practice, I think, is important to note for everyone here, is that practice is an engaged it's an engaged way of being in the world, and to be able to blend those, to be able to have that be basically the same word for you, I think is awesome, and it shows a lot of your own values. But personally, I'm curious for you to give maybe a kind of your own like little visionary overview of the way that you're trying to blend the research with the activism. What is your your solution, or the things that you're most excited about in being able to combine this value-based system of thought like the Dharma with to tackle the existential threats that we experience on both a systemic scale and then ultimately personally as well. What is your approach to that? And maybe you could introduce a little bit of the things you're building to help tackle that.
Yeah. This makes me think about like even wanting to revisit the previous thread around how, like, for me, coming to the US under the setting of like, oh, you're right, there's some trouble back home, and for safety reasons, it's better for me to be in the US. But at the same time, like getting into this whole crypto economics realm here for a couple of years, and like learning what it is to work on startups in Silicon Valley, and then like at one point also being pretty disillusioned because I was like, yeah, right, all this can theoretically save the world, but in practice, not really. Like I remember like finding myself like wanting to get back into my own practice more, and then joining like the monastic academy, which is like a modern monastery focused on tackling existential risks in the world. And what we were attempting to do there again is this fusion of like how can we be present to the suffering of the world and yet still like use those opportunity to practice towards awakening. And I spent at least a good part of last year and this year like on that. So it wasn't until recently that I even came out like to the crypto space again, because for me it's just sometimes disheartening to see that the crypto space might even just become Wall Street 2.0. So there's a real danger there where if we are not careful as to what we are designing in our own blind spot, this is where I hope more Buddhist economics can come to the forefront. And this is where I personally like love to go into like, okay, like the history, like let's excavate some things around like what actually is Buddhist economics. Because I feel like we don't have all too much examples of it in the real world. There are countries trying to do that. I think about Bhutan or Tibet, or I think about Thailand, and with like self-sufficiency economy, I think about the GNH. Now, yet, like, I feel like it still happens in this background of like capitalism, and before that, colonialism haven't taken over those countries, or rather that in that interface, it often feels like a David versus Goliath game. So Those were the questions that I went into the monastery with. And I also thank Vidya here that, like, I remember we were talking in one of those times and we're like, yeah, like, you know, there's so much understanding that is not apparent here, like around what the history of Buddhist economics even is, because I feel like we both look at it as like, oh, there's Gregory Chopin with his work around, you know, how monastery was actually like an incubator of a lot of like financial instruments back then. Like heck, some of them even invented like lending at interest rate, or, you know, certain endowment and all that. But I feel like, you know, the way that we look at Buddhist economics often necessarily entails this kind of just aesthetic, like, sorry, I'm not pronouncing that right, but like, you know, just like, you know, just a letting go kind of way, like, which is important for me. Now, like, that's why I feel like this is like a full stack effort. Like, I sometimes talk about it as like a multi-level miracles is required. Everything from our own practice down to our understanding of like what has happened in the past, what can happen in the future, and what is the tools that we could use. And what is the view that we are going to impart in all of this. So I'm just gonna say that whatever I'm gonna say about quote unquote the solution, it's not going to be at all comprehensive. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have more discussions like this is just to bring up like what is something that you would like to contribute to the map of solutions, if you will. Because like for me, like one important anchoring point is like having everyone come in to a discussion with sharing their practice. Like, say my practice is to research, you know, I will create this ecosystem map that kind of tries to create like people's different practice, like, and how they are interlinked. And so that's one thing that I actually want to do going forward, because it's just a problem that requires a lot of hands on deck, all hands on deck, in fact. So, all right, so with that context, what I'm trying to work on now is coming out of the crypto fellowship recently. I'm working on something I call Signs of Life DAO. And Signs of Life is like signs like as like signals, like how do we find signals of life? That in the model of the Polynesian navigators back then, going to the open seas without any tools, but they were able to have ancient wisdom that was passed down through songs that sensitized them to what's happening around them, like the sea currents, the birds, the moon, the stars, and how to, you know, work with one another. It's like that's the inspiration, like around like indie futurism. Like indie also means not just indigenous, but also like the Latin word for going within, like endo. And so DAO is a fancy term in the crypto space to mean decentralized autonomous organization. So there's also an experiment around, can we bring together people in a way that doesn't introduce like the typical hierarchy of like saying a king or some central figure, and that still we can still share resources with one another and work on a common goal together. And I should also mention that this DAO is also a project that I shared this link around Chi Punk. Chi Punk is, again, my way of like bringing together the East and the West by bringing together tradition, but also bringing together some hacker spirit to all this, and also the North and the South, because I also feel like the global North and South is often bickering over, in, for example, climate discussion, like who is responsible. And I feel like I really wanted something that can find our way to break free from all this, and navigate ourselves out of like this hothouse of Earth trajectory that we are possibly going to be locked in. Yeah. So that's a brief overview for now. Dexter.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's so many fascinating things inside of there that
be unpacked. But I want to see if anyone else has any questions here, because that was really stimulating. Yeah, go for it. Anybody who is already on the stage, or if you've got any questions, you can raise your hand.
Sorry, it's me again. I just wanted to follow up, Vienna, with a bit more questions about how Signs of Life DAO works. Like, how does it use the crypto technology? And I know very little, so Dexter sent out this video about explaining it to a 5-year-old and like a 13-year-old, and I feel like I was on that level. So just as background.
So we could go back and say that crypto is a shorthand of saying like a bunch of different technologies now we call like distributed ledger technology. Well, what that means is something around how do you have if I can be experimental here, how can I and your world come together? Like that's the distributed ledger part. Like, I have a way of seeing the world and you do too. But then there's a way that, for example, in the past, money has helped us do that. It helps us come together by having this really flat dimension that just exchange my ledger, which is, let's say, my time into some numbers, and then your time to some numbers, and then we would exchange that. So now what new distributed ledger technology, new crypto economics is trying to challenge us to do is to say, well, if we are able to not just flatten those exchange, but also like bring multidimensional value to it, like what would that look like? How would I convey my value in a way that you could also agree on and that we could have an exchange? Is that making some sense for you, Dojiang?
Yes.
Yeah. So the way that I had like to look at it is, so like people talk about smart contracts, and smart contracts are something that you could execute automatically when certain conditions are met. So say that, you and I, we might not even have a shared common like denominator right now, like, but that can even have, we could even have friends who, let's just say that there's Vienna coin, and then there's Doreen's coin, and then like, we want to exchange with one another, but there's no market for it. But you could actually have someone who, let's say Vidya, knows both of us, and he could come step in and say like, oh, actually, I can easily swap both of your coins for one another because I trust in both of you, and I am happy to hold like your coin and her coin like for 10 years. And so he will basically help us be that exchange, if you will. So in that way, we no longer need like a centralized third party to mediate our exchange. Like we don't no longer need, like, say, government to be a part of that, right? And so now that is also how like the DAO like works. Like, so this decentralized autonomous organization is also an attempt at like, okay, like what would it look like if people are able to work on the projects that they value, believe in, and have economic sustainability, so that, like Dexter said, like you don't have to just be a martyr. You can also be a part of creating something that you value.
Okay, I have a questions actually. Like so many things running in my head after listening to this. Well, I mean, the concept is actually pretty great, and it's actually promote like true democracy when everyone has voices. And the thing is, like we have learned so far in our life to actually have someone to moderate something. Yeah, like in every aspect of our life. How can we actually kind of like unlearn that, or actually cultivate like the new culture, like the bill tree, for instance, to actually kind of like flourish this in the future, that has to be only young people or older people can actually be participate in that. When you know that older people actually has this kind of like past and background of having the control, having someone to moderate that kind of mind in, and like how do you see the future of that? Thanks.
Yeah. This is such a fascinating question because I think about intergenerationality a lot. Like, how can we learn from the wisdom of like the ancient and the ancestors and the elders, and also like have they be a part of the conversation with the younger people, like so. So I often think about, yeah, so there's a need to unlearn on all sides of this. So like with the younger people, I remember hanging out with them at the Fridays for Future Kids at the UN, where like on one hand I'm like incredibly inspired by their activism, and then on the other hand I'm like, well, like it would be helpful if we can somehow sustainably work together with older generation, because then it doesn't have to just be going onto the streets. It can also be motivated by like love as well, not just anger, but also like some kind of I remember seeing this a lot when I was in doing activism. Like we often use fear and anger as motivation, and I feel like in a way, like our elder generation often help to bring in a kind of more like stabilization effect. At the same time, like I also do feel like it cannot fully operate in the ways of the past as well, because that's also partially what has brought us here today. And in that sense, I think that the young people are right. But in another sense, I feel like they are going to recreate the same problem if they don't look more deeply into, is this motivated by ignorance or some kind of insight? Yeah, and how do we do this? I'm curious, Topsy, if you have any like insight to how would you do this?
Well, I mean, like with the Buddhist principle of compassion and loving kindness, I mean, it's if it's all there, I think we can overcome pretty much many things, especially like intergeneration conflicts, which
Mm-hmm.
it seems to happen in different places, like yeah, like in Thailand here,
Mm-hmm.
in Myanmar, in different places in Asia, for instance. So yeah, this ancient wisdom of cultivating compassion, I find it's the key to actually kind of like bring forward, yeah, to the solution together.
Mm-mm-mm. So from what I'm gathering from you, it's like having people like different generation coming into a room together, for example, and then having like dialogues based on compassion, like that. And is that what I'm hearing? Like how, like I'm also curious about what are the problems in Thailand
Yeah,
and
I
Myanmar.
mean like practically would be yes, or actually like open their heart more to listen more of the different opinions.
Mm-hmm.
You don't actually have to agree with it, but I mean just not like accepting it that people have different opinion. That's already a good step to go forward, because right now like when people hear different opinion, they would just immediately think that, oh, these people are our enemies, not even friends, not even someone that we can listen to anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. I think like the only challenge there that I have is that um, this is actually to you, which is that uh, like in the Buddhist circle, and Vidya knows this. Like I often talk about like, well, like it would be great if we have infinite time. Like I'm curious about how might we do this in a time of crisis as well, where where there is a need to work together, and there's also a need to be sensitive to the time, the reality of what's happening, like in a non-linear way, meaning like, you know, whatever, any dialogues that you can make happen today in a way that builds more understanding, even if it's not agreement, is more powerful than tomorrow. Like, given that, you know, it is a perpetuating feedback loop. It's like the samsaric cycle, and that, but now we are seeing that our samsaric cycle is also collective, and that it can very quickly be combined with technological tools that can make it go even more exponential, in the sense that, like, destruction, like, you know, like you say, we can have conflict, and now we have more tools to kind of put everything on fire faster than before. So what can we do? Like, what does compassion look like in these times?
Yeah, that's still yet to be debated. I mean, yeah. Welcome to listen to more ideas.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like, Jasmine, you might have something to say.
Hi, I'm just really excited about this this conversation happening, and definitely coming from a place of like learning versus and listening. So within Kernel, I haven't really like encountered you in Vienna, although I saw your Kernel showcase. And I guess my context in terms of Buddhism is, I read Buddhist economics, or like the essay by E.F. Shoemaker, and I just want to get a from like how you understand this intersection, and also if you have any call outs or like calling in to folks working within crypto, so coming from a more of a technologist lens, like what are different principles that you hope people might build with? Are there particular projects that you find exciting? Would also love to hear more about what you're trying to like bring into the world. I heard a bit about it at the showcase.
Yeah, thanks, Jasmine. Oh, so happy that you're here. It's I just have to plug in something about what Jasmine did as well, which is that, you know, during Kernel, she just put together with a bunch of other people in Kernel, like this declaration for interdependence of the site. Like, I might be missing a few words here and there, of the cyberspace, after, as a reaction to what when Facebook claimed that metaverse is, and it's their IP in a way. And so yeah, so I'm very happy that Jasmine is here. And so what this all means for me, like in terms of principles of the Small is Beautiful book, like I feel like, you know, like this is where I've tried to even apply like my own terminology, coming from working with the climate economics a bit after my startup, which is this 0 Degree project based out of Stanford that Vidya also got to join me at once, where we were exploring like what, like, could it be said that with like what we have seen with E.F. Schumacher, like small is beautiful, like is like letting go, like the mind, like that lets go, like a kind of Marie Kondo type of mind as well, is also similar to the dependent co-origination loop that liberates, not just the typical loop that gets you back in suffering, but rather that if you actually are able to see things as it is, that it actually gets you to a kind of letting go, and yet finding perhaps the 1% of the things that keeps you alive as a practice, as a timeless practice. But you might have to shed 99% that is delusion based. Now, then I asked, like, quote unquote crypto founders, like, hey, so what is your practice? Could you share with me? It can be just, you know, I'm engaged in starting this startup, but then or I'm engaged in building this technical protocol, like whatever that is. Like, how is it that you are using this more cooling mind to do that, such that it's not just an acquisition for more status, more fame in the traditional economic sense, but rather that you're also actively creating something beautiful that comes from within. And that's again just scratching the surface of like principles in terms of like Buddhist economics, because I feel like there's so many things that I wish gets rebuilt in the technical space. Everything from how we design in time an identity system, like you have, a kind of a permanent base identity system that is based on the self. And that for me is like already like a non-starter. I'm like, well, how can we have generative identity? Like people talk about self-sovereign identity, but it's like, generative identity, it's like we are who we are around as well. And also that, assuming that we have fixed self is also a recipe for this kind of, I would say like getting stuck in this hamster wheel that is also not just heating up our own mind, but also heating up the earth. And that we participate in the systems that we are trying to come up with solution for, whereas we are actually part of the problem too. So I often want to urge take some time to go on a meditation retreat, and heck, maybe we can even do it together. And that's my intention in Science of Life, Tao as well. So actually want to be able to have weekly meditation together with founders as well, and kind of practice together, use our work as a practice together, a practice ground, so that we could help build a kind of more enlightened system. I mean, technically speaking, I'm also working on a few other projects to coming out from the monastery to try to build a financial system that is in alignment with the first precept of Buddhism. And that has a lot more to do with how do you use reputation systems, how do you use impact in how do you prove that you have a cool impact in the world. People think about climate change as a thing that is just happening outside of myself, it's maybe a technological project, but I would like to bring it to a point where we can see that our mind has an effect on our relationship, and that to the projects that we're engaged in. And that's why you saw me trying to bring in the NFT that has this biofeedback integrated in it. So that's just to show the feedback loop between our state of mind and our work. Now, in terms of principles, if anything, that would be an important principle for me to watch out for. And then there's other super fascinating things around time that I wish people put their practice into the tools, because I think the way that we're designing in our digital system now, unfortunately, is also creating the same problem that we see with this linear sense of time that capitalism brings us to. It's we are part of the conveyor belt, we're all created equally, whereas we all actually relate to a certain moment differently. And how can you even have your ledger have an honoring of your inner time that is different than someone else? I would like to see 10,000 different clocks that can get synchronized. But that's also because I just want to bring us away from this mindset that we are consumer, but we're consumer of technology. Because what crypto can enable is that we are designers now. That then the question is, what would you design in a way that brings people to awakening, both personally and collectively? Yeah.
Thank you. And if you ever write this down, I think a lot of people would appreciate it. I don't know if you've already somewhere, but I would love to be pointed there. So.
Yeah, thanks, Jasmine. Oh, that's such a high honor. Well, okay. Yeah, I would love to. I would love to write this down somewhere. I mean, so far, I'm trying to put it on whatever little resources I found around relevant stuff. I put it on Discord, on Cheap Hunk. But in terms of a fully fleshed out paper. Like I have this Notion thing that I'm starting, but I would love to do something with you. Oh my gosh, there's so much to be done. Oh. Like I mean, like again, the Tao is also an attempt for me, like to bring together people from east, west, north, south, and also old and young people. Although, like the first trial run will probably look like maybe even 3 to 5 people from the Digital Bodhisattva Initiative and also the indigenous youth in Malaysia that I have known personally to try to onboard them to crypto economics and see what they might design. So that's a curiosity I have. Like, what happens when you bring into the room like an indigenous youth who is already aware of the climate crisis, and then there's also the technologists that can also help them crunch some numbers or create some tools. But there's also people who are the philanthropists who often we think about as, some people think about them as evil, or some people think about them as, God. But like, I would just like them to be in the room. Yeah. So that's something else.
I'd like to say, yeah, I'm still getting used to using Clubhouse. So, yeah. So a lot of things you've said have really inspired me, and it's like almost there's too many thoughts, so, but the one thing that was really clear about the crypto part, and this kind of mutual verification is that I'm one of the staff members of INEB, and I think not only me, but others in the group have so many projects and so many design ideas, and that is not a problem. But what is inspiring is your idea that we could work on the projects that we really want to devote our lives to, and have the resources to do that, And I think there are so many people in that situation now, and that would be a huge way to move the whole movement forward. I mean, when I say movement, is meeting the climate crisis, but for me, that's also like for you, it's about looking at really what is happening in the economic situation, which is so it's discouraging because there is huge amounts of financial resources, but they are guided in very, very strict ways, to keep accumulating, so that was inspiring to think, oh, maybe there could be some kind of, and I still don't understand exactly how that will work, but I'd love to keep following, The other thing that I really related to was your idea that, and I can share what I do, but I have multiple projects in my mind, and the key thing is that we end up spending a lot of our time on fundraising, and it kind of takes a lot of our energy, not only me, but others in the team, But just one other quick comment is that I really liked what you said about, you sort of indicated, could we start dialogues like immediately, one of the things I do, I feel that I contribute to this whole wider movement is through INEB. I bring together small groups of young leaders from around Asia, 12 to 18 people, and we work on refiguring our imagination about what's possible, and that's what you're doing, and that's wonderful. And by the way, there's this wonderful book. It's called The Dawn of Everything. I hope you all read it. Yeah, it's
Lawrence and I am reading that. Yeah.
What, say it again. You're laughing. What?
Oh, I'm laughing because we are reading that right now.
Oh, okay. Well, David, I'm an anthropologist, and David Graeber is one of my most favorite anthropologists. And anyway, he's talking about how indigenous people contributed so much to European ideas about democracy and so on, and that all of us are capable of this imagination. Yeah, but anyway, that that's a big part of our work in me getting together with students, because they've been so trained to listen, to look good and so on, But I just quickly want to say that in this peer counseling network that I'm part of, one of their social actions is they spend time listening to each other, and then they focus on some kind of question, like, do you think it's possible to have a world without war? And then they go out into some public area and they just set up a little listening booth, and they put up this question, and then people will stop by, and then they just start a conversation, and they don't try to They don't try to put forward any particular answer. They just say, well, what do you think? And I think that's really lovely, and it sort of connects to what you said. Yeah.
Yep, lots in there. So the first thing is I wanted to quickly mention that it like when it comes to Western thought, like when even the very concept of zero was brought from India, like shunya, right? Like emptiness. But it doesn't mean the way that we think about emptiness these days, but really because we brought the mathematics of zero to the West, and the same decade it was the spirituality of zero was destroyed there. So I would almost sometimes say like, what is happening now is like a kind of like excavation of like what that spirituality of zero means. And David Graeber is kind of like you could say like a friend of a friend of like when I was working on Economic Space Agency, which is the crypto startup that I have. He is also part of that, wave of economists, anthropologists who are like looking at all this as like, what can we learn from the indigenous culture? What can we learn about the past? Or what are we not misunderstanding these days, actually? So, yeah, so there's that. And then to your question around like funding, like you say, right now we're literally seeing that crypto, like, DeFi is this a term for decentralized finance, like just like even 1 month old projects in the crypto space, like in this case, like it was a climate focused DAO, like called Climate DAO. Like they have like a $500 million valuation even after only launching for a month. So
Wow.
that's the amount of scale that we're talking about. That's why I wanted to even, turn people's attention from from the International Network of Engaged Buddhists to say that there is very powerful tools that are being developed right now, but it also really matters like who is a part of that conversation. So yeah, so thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
And thank you, dear listener, for listening to this episode of the Digital Bodhisattva podcast. Make sure to join the Digital Bodhisattva Clubhouse if you'd like to participate in our next conversation, and follow the podcast on Spotify so you get updates about our latest episodes. Thanks very much for your attention. Have a wonderful day.